We are so glad that you're here. We're in the middle of a series. We are looking at what was called, what does it mean to be financially healthy? What does it mean to be walking financially healthy in our lives today? How do we do that? We started 2 weeks ago really looking at, the world talks a lot about financial health being, we look at physical health, we look at spiritual health, we look at mental health, but a lot of us never look at what does it mean to be financially healthy in God's world. How does God want us to really focus in on all of that? Maybe I'm just going to move this up just a little bit to take it away from that might just work a little bit better. And so how do we do it? Last week we looked at, there's 4 spiritual laws within being financially healthy. Last week we looked at what does it mean to be content? What does it mean to be living contently with things? And if someone is being blessed, are we able to rejoice with them, or are we in that place of coveting where we think, oh, why didn't I get that? Why didn't I have that? Or are we content with that, just someone else being blessed with something new and we don't have it? And so are we content financially? Are we content with what we have? Or do we always need and want something more? Or is there something that we can get into that place of being just content? One of the things that I love about God is He's not a God of chaos. He is a God that is very much orderly. He wants us to be very orderly in a lot of our ways of life. I love the fact that if you look at God, we could say, look at the world, look at the world of chaos, but look at the earth. It's perfectly situated in the atmosphere that is going around on our atlas, and the scientists know that if it tilts even 1% one way, we're going to freeze up. And if it tilts 1% the other way, they say we will burn up. So God perfectly placed the earth in a place that's not chaos, it's perfect. And so He really wants us to be in that place of being in order. And He wants things to be in order. And so He looks at what does it mean to be in order in our lives? How do we become orderly? And finances is one way He wants us to say, I want to be different, I want to be new, I want to be something different. I want to say that this series, I wish I would have went through it 25, 30 years ago. Cheryl and I would have been way better off 25, 30 years ago instead of really, and I want to say, you're going to hear a lot of this, we walked through all of these things to get to where we are today. It wasn't that all of a sudden, sometimes we look at the lottery and the Lotto Max seems to be the big thing. It's $60 million. And there's always, you could sit there and think, what would it be like to win that? But God's never blessed me with that kind of a lottery because I don't know how to handle that. And I really believe it. And most people who win the lottery, within 5 years, are broke. Most people who win the lottery. And so I would rather live my life the way God has taught Cheryl and I, to live it so that we can walk in this place of finding how not to be and how God really wants us to live with our finances. What does it mean to be there? And so we're looking this week at a different law. So last week we looked at the law of contentment. This week we're looking at the law of sowing and weeping. And so if we are content, and I really have to stress this, we really need to be content where we are, or these next 3 lessons aren't going to really help. Because if I'm in that place where I'm always looking at coveting something more, wanting something more, something new in my life, this will make me happy if I have this in my life. If that's where I'm at, I will never be able to get past that. I really need to get past that. Cheryl will tell you many times in our lives, I would say, no, this is going to make me happy, baby. And then within 2-3 weeks, I'm thinking, why? And I can't tell her that I'm thinking this, but I'm starting to think, why did I want this? It's not bringing me the happiness that I thought it would bring me. And, and so a lot of times we had to change that aspect. And so if we're looking at the law of sowing and weeping, Proverbs 11:18, it says this: a wicked man earns a deprived wage. In other words, he's doing it dishonestly, but he who sows righteously will certainly reap a reward. I don't know about you, but I want what God has for me. He's got goodness for all of us. He has amazing things in our life. I want everything that He has for me. I want it honestly. I want to do it so that God will reward me and that I can have them. So I don't want to do things dishonestly. I want to be able to walk in the ways of God so that God blesses me abundantly. And when I say me, I really mean Cheryl and I, because when we get blessed, we are blessed. We get things that are coming that makes our life a lot simpler. And so we're going to go through 9 laws of sowing and weeping. 9 laws that will take us into a place of us really understanding what does it mean to sow and weep in people's lives and in our lives. So the first law is this: everything starts with a seed. Everything in this world starts with a seed. There's nothing in this world that did not start with a seed. And a seed could be a thought, an idea. How do you build a building? It has to come with that seed of an idea, that thought. What does it mean? When people built this building back in the 60s, they had to start with that seed. What does it mean to start this? When our parents were thinking about having children, it started with the thought, hey, we want to have children. Then it starts with the seed. Plants, when they grow, they start with a seed. Everything happens with a seed. God's plan for this world was everything would start with a seed. Very first book in the Bible, Genesis chapter 1, verse 11, says this: let the land have seed-bearing plants and trees that bear fruit with seeds in its according to its varieties. So it's telling us that everything that starts with a seed, everything, I can't go out and say, if I have a garden, and say, okay, I want a beautiful garden, put some dirt in there, walk away and say, in the springtime, I'm going to have a beautiful garden. Because I won't have anything unless I got a seed. I have to have that seed to be able to put it in there. I love the fact that, like Zephaniah says, do not despair the day of small things. That means a seed is very small. Most of us know the size of an apple seed. When we eat an apple, there's 3 to 6 seeds in an apple when you eat it. Those little black things, that little seed, if you plant that seed in the ground and it germinates and it grows into a tree, one of the things that I love about is we can count how many seeds are in an apple, but we cannot count how many apples are in that seed. Think about it a moment. And we're going to plant that seed in the ground and that tree grows, and all of a sudden that one little seed will give us 20, 100 apples. If you go up to the Okanagan, there's many apples that are produced because of one little seed, one little thing that is planted in the ground. That's what it takes. It takes all this aspect. Everything starts with a seed. And so our finances starts with the thought, I want to live a better life. I want to live financially free. I don't want to be a slave to my bank account. I don't want to be doing this anymore. I need to have a change. I need to be something different than where I was. And not everybody is in that place. Many people, I was talking with someone this morning, and they grew up in a home where their family taught them as a young child how to handle money. A lot of us, I never was taught how to handle money. I was taught how to spend it. My dad knows how to spend money. I know how to spend money, but I don't know how to save it, invest it, and do all those other things. I had to learn all those aspects. It was something that needed to be taught. I needed to have that seed planted in me. I needed to have that thought, that idea, the dream. If you want to have the good life, you have to start now and think about, okay, what is it that seed I need to have planted in me? What is it that I need to have and look at? Job 8:7 says, though that you start with seems small and insignificant, you will end up in the future with much more. I may have a small seed. I may have a small thought, that small idea, but in the future, I will have much, much more. And that's where we have to look at it, that everything starts with the seed. The second law is this: nothing happens until you plant it. You can have all the seeds in the world, but unless you put them in the ground, they're going to not do anything. I can have all the great thoughts I want to do with my finances. Unless I start doing something with them, I can't do anything. Cheryl grew up in Saskatchewan, and she's blessed me by taking me back to the farms in Saskatchewan. And I like going back to the farms of Saskatchewan in the summer. As soon as fall hits. I don't like Saskatchewan. I'm not a fan of cold. But her brother-in-law owns a farm. If his brother-in-law went out and decided, okay, we're going to plant XYZ in the field, I'm going to take all my life savings and I'm going to buy these seeds because they got many acres. I think they got somewhere in the neighborhood of 400-something acres in northern Saskatchewan. If he went out and bought all his seeds and put them in the barn, and then when spring came, said, oh, you know what, that's my life savings. I'm just going to leave it in the barn because that's my life savings. Nothing will ever happen with those seeds. His life savings will disappear because nothing ever happened because he never put it in the ground. Until I get an idea and a thought, and now I put some action behind it, nothing will ever happen. My farm, my land, everything will be the same. Nothing's going to happen in this world unless I put it in the ground. That means for my finances, nothing's going to change until I put it into action. Nothing is going to change in our lives. I like the fact that John 12:24, Jesus says this, unless a grain of wheat is buried in the ground, it cannot reproduce. But if it dies, it will produce much fruit. I love the fact that when Jesus was talking about this, I want to look at the idea that Jesus being that seed, unless he was buried in the ground, it will not bear much fruit. Unless Jesus died for you and I and was buried in the ground so that we now get to live in freedom because of what he did, not because of what we did, without that, we wouldn't have our freedom today. And so nothing happened. It may have been a thought, hey, and Jesus knew when he came to the earth that this was his plan. He was to go to the cross and die for you and I. But if it never happened, we wouldn't have millions and millions and millions of us saved today. Unless it's put in the ground, nothing happens. I mean, because Jesus, that one seed, that one man who died for you and I, just amazingly, millions and millions of people have been saved because of that one seed. And that principle lies with everything. Unless I do and put some action behind it and I do something different, nothing will ever happen. I need to start with the idea, the thought, the direction. Now I need to take the action. I need to start doing the work. I need to be putting it into the ground. The third piece here is, whatever I sow, I will reap. That means if I go and buy kidney beans and plant them in the ground, I'm going to end up with watermelon. It means I'm going to end up with kidney beans. Whatever I plant is what's going to come out. We don't think that I'm going to plant potatoes and then in the spring and fall or summer I'm going to have ripe red tomatoes. I'm going to have potatoes. It means whatever I'm sowing, that's what I'm getting back. I want to play this. That means if I am sowing negative, that's what I'm getting back is negative. If I'm walking through the world with my head down and grumbling about everything, oh, life is bad, I'm going to be called a grumpy old man and people are going to stay away from me because that's what I'm sowing. It depends on what I sow in the world is what I get back. Cheryl and I have been blessed with the cancer clinic that we go to twice a week. I just say we are blessed. And one of the things that we're blessed with is that we don't go in there grumbling and complaining about how bad we got some great nurses and we got some okay nurses. They could do better. But those great nurses, I want to tell you, when we go in, and I want to tell you this, we go in, we walk in, and when we see them walking, we always say, good morning, hello, how are you? Glad to see you, glad you're here. When we look at the board, they got a huge board on the wall, and they got all these names and things on there, and then it's C. Olson, that's Cheryl, and we tick off her name, we go there, and we see who it is, and Cheryl will say, who's my nurse? And we'll say, Katie's a nurse. I'll say, Katie's our nurse. Oh, great, Katie, we got Katie, and we start walking down to our room that we got to go to. Why do we do that? Because we know that what we sow, we reap. We have been going for 4 months, and I want to tell you, we knew one of the nurses happened to be out from our old church. I didn't know that that's where she worked. So we knew her. But we know there's other nurses in that ward that when we come there, they are coming, oh, where's Cheryl? We got to come over. I got to come over and say hello to Cheryl. Where's Cheryl? I'm walking down the hallway. They'll go, oh, hi, Bruce. Where's Cheryl? What room is she in? I want to go and say hello to Cheryl. They all want to come and say hi to her. Why? Because no matter what is happening, no matter what mood we're in, even when they're making the mistakes and we're staying there for 4, 5, 9 hours in the day, when we should have only been there 3, but because of mistakes, we're there longer, we're still sowing positively. Why? Because we want to reap what we sow. We want to have that nurse. They're looking after my wife. They're making decisions based on her. I don't want them making decisions because of my grumpiness or my wife's grumpiness. I want them making decisions on what's best for us. And because we're sowing that positiveness out there, that's what we're getting back. I want to ask you, what are you sowing in this world? Because if you're wanting to have something back, you need to have it come back. We need to see what it is. God says each of us reproduce after its own kind. That means potatoes produce potatoes, tomatoes, tomatoes. They don't mix. We need to remember that whatever I'm sowing in life, that's what's coming back to me. That means when I was a compulsive spender, that's what I was sowing. It wasn't until I changed that aspect and realized that I needed to change that our life changed in our finances, that things started to change differently. I started asking the bigger question, is this a need or a want? When I started asking myself that question, things changed. When I was asking the universe and Cheryl, never changed. Nothing changed. It wasn't until I took it on that things changed in our lives. And we needed to be looking at that. So I needed to look at the idea of what I was sowing, I was getting back. Galatians 6:7 says, do not deprive yourself. No one makes a fool of God. You will reap exactly what you have planted in life. That means I can't sit there and plant some negativity and sit there and say, God, why aren't you blessing me? Why am I not having positive in my life? If I'm not producing, if I'm only planting, God's only going to bless with me what I'm reaping out there. I'm going to only reap what I'm sowing into the world. If I'm driving on the road and it's my worst place, I pray every time I'm in the vehicle, Lord, don't let a church member cut me off and make me upset in the car, because I don't want to be that person, right? Because I do everything I can for not. I want to make sure that I'm not doing that. And then when I do that, I go, oh, Lord. And so why is it that every silly driver seems to come in front of me? Because that's what I'm sowing. Once I change that, when we drive an hour to an hour and a half into Vancouver and back every day, or every Tuesdays and Fridays. And as we do that, I get into the lane and I just drive. And I drive that person, I don't know why they're not driving quicker. They should be driving a little faster. They're in the fast lane. Why they're driving slower than the ones in the slow lane. But I just get in behind. That's what I do. And when they get out of my way, I go a little quicker. But I need to learn to sow it. I can't say to God, well, why are you doing this if that's what I'm sowing? And if I want to have good in my life, if I want to have financial success, I need to sow financial success into my life. I need to start looking at it. I got to stop looking at the negative aspects, and I got to stop trying to fool God. God's not going to give us something when we haven't got ourselves ready to receive it. I want the blessing. I want the financial blessings in my life. I needed to be prepared to receive it. Until I was prepared to receive it, God did not bless me. And I want us to remember that that's what God will do. He's not a fool. He knows what he's doing. Proverbs 26:27 says, who digs a pit will fall into it himself. He who rolls a stone will have it rolled back on him. That means if I'm out there hurting people, people are going to be hurting me. If I'm wondering why I'm being hurt consistently, what am I giving out? What's happening in my life? What am I wanting to change? Cheryl and I have been talking a little bit about my weight gain since she got sick, and I have said, and I say to myself, Cheryl wants a bowl of ice cream, I get her a bowl of ice cream. I think I don't want her to eat alone. And so I get myself a bowl of ice cream. But you see, I was fooling myself into thinking, I'm doing positive here. I want to support my wife. But what it does is my weight gain just went tremendously through the roof. And I needed to change that. I can't sit there and say, oh God, why are you allowing me to gain weight when I'm sowing eating? I needed to change. I need to change my ways, my actions, and my thoughts. I need to know, because it says in Hosea 10:13 says, you plant wickedness, now you will reap evil. So whatever I plant, that's what's coming back. And it's all in life. We hear that. What goes around comes around. What I'm doing is going to come back to me. And I want positive. I want good things. I want simple things. And so I want to be able to know that when I'm planting tomatoes in the late summer, I'm going to get beautiful red tomatoes. And so I need to make sure that that's what I'm planting. I make sure that I'm planting something that is positive in the lives, and so that I have it. My finances, if I want to be financially secure, I need to be positively planting in my finances. I need to change what I'm doing. The fourth law is this: I'm not the only sower. I'm not the only sower. I talked to Cheryl about this yesterday, and she said, I may change what I want to talk about. I'm not. I'm going to stay with this. Our native friends, when we're watching all over the news, we're seeing how somebody sowing in generations is affecting us today. And because of what's happened generationals, it still affects us today. And I'm going to use my grandchildren are First Nations. We're working on trying to get them status cards so that they can have all that they're entitled to. But one of the things happened was when Kamloops came out and said there was 215 graves found. And our granddaughter's watching the news. And she hears that they took Native children out of their home and placed them in the schools. And then she heard that her grandmother on her dad's side, who they call not grandma, her name is Cookham, was taken out of her home and put into these schools. She started crying. She was 10 years old. She started crying and said to her mom, our daughter, will this happen to me? A 10-year-old watching the news was very impressionable. We know that her grandmother was sown into residential schools. Her Cookham lived and survived a residential school. That sowing now comes down to a little girl who now is First Nation, who now knows her status and who she is as a woman and her fullness, and she embraces it fully, says, is this going to happen to me? What I love about that is our daughter said, no, you will never be taken away from my home. You'll never be put into that. That was a law that got changed and it was wrong. And that you will never get out of my home. And matter of fact, your dad, her son, never lived in a residential school. So that generation got stopped. And so what we need to remember is that if I have generational sowing happening in my life, and I say that I'm acting the same as my family, then that's a generational sowing that's happening in my life. And that can change right now if it's not positive in our lives. You can stop that right now and say, I want to be different. I grew up in a home where my dad did a lot of yelling and a lot of hitting. I swore that I would never hit my child and I would never hit my wife. But I got to a place where I thought yelling in the home was okay. I thought hitting a wall instead of my wife was okay because I'm not hitting her. It wasn't until one day I smashed a piece of furniture in front of my wife and I looked at her and I seen the fear that I live with. When I seen her have the fear that I had as a child, first I was puzzled. I never hit her. She never had a black eye. She's never had a broken nose. She's never been in the hospital because of the way I treated her. But here she had the fear on her face that I understood. And I was saying, why? It took me 2 years in counseling to learn that there was generational sowing in my life that I had to change. Even though I never hit her, I still was acting like my father. I needed to change that so that my life, that I could stop it now. And we can all stop this. But I wanted to say that not all of us have bad generational sowings in our lives. Sometimes we have some very positive ones. I love the lady who shared with me this morning that her family was teaching her how to do with money. Well, she was sown properly in generations of how to handle money way back. Not all of us have. And so when we have something positive in our lives that's being sown in our lives from generation after generation, then embrace it and grab a hold of it and say, I want to use this. I love the fact that our granddaughter, who is a First Nations girl, embraces that sowing into her life, embraces who she is. I love it when she comes home from being in her class and says, here, Papa or Grandma, I made this in my native class today and I want you to have it. And we don't have any native blood in us. But I embrace it because that's my granddaughter and that's what she is. And I want that generation to be good for us. John 4:38. Jesus tells this to his 12 disciples. I send you out to reap where you did not plant. Others have already done the work for you, and you will gather the harvest. So that tells me that sometimes someone will be doing some harvesting in other generations, and I will be able to gather what I did not sow. I will be able to have a blessing places I did not sow. Sometimes it's family where they have financial wealth, but sometimes it's, I'm going to say that I came into Highway Church 2 years ago and blessed by being the senior pastor of a church where we don't have no debt. Because the church before me, generations before me, made sure that the church was not in financial debt, I get to sow that as the senior pastor of the church, that I don't have to have that over me today. That's a generational sowing. That's others who sowed. That's a positive sowing that I get to reap. And then we get to reap as a church, and we get to walk with that, and we see that. And so that means that when we get to have that harvest, great things happen. The fifth law of reaping and sowing is this: I always reap in a different season than when I sow. That means when I plant that apple tree, I can't come out the next day and undig it and say, hey, where's my apple tree? If I plant tomatoes in the spring, I can't expect to have tomatoes 2 weeks later. I may do some sowing, but I'm going to reap in a different season. And sometimes we think that we expect that season to happen now. We expect that if I'm doing the planting, if I'm going out there and doing the planting, I expect it now. If I'm going to invest some money, I'm going to take some money, and I'm going to say this, we have some investment right now, I look at it daily. And I say to Cheryl, why isn't there any interest on this money yet? And it's been in there since March. Where's my interest? Cheryl said, I don't know. I said, it's still the same dollar that was there when I planted it 8 months ago. Why hasn't it changed? You see, sometimes there's a different season when things happen. I love this in Ecclesiastes chapter 3. It says, there is a time for everything and a season for every activity under heaven. There is a time to plant and a time to harvest. There is a time to scatter and a time to gather. There is a time to sow and a time to weep. That means there's a time and season for everything. I may sow something today and I may not reap it for years to come. And we need to be able to do that. And I may sow something today or this month that will be generational, and it won't even affect me. It may affect my grandchildren, may affect their children. I love the fact that Cheryl and we have talked lots about the legacy that we want to leave behind. What is that legacy that we want to leave? What is it that we want to have? And I have to say this, Cheryl got to watch our grandchildren when they were growing up and our daughter was working. Cheryl got to be blessed and babysit them. It wasn't until Lyndon, the third one, that she started to use technology and started watching Christian little shows with him and watch with him. And it wasn't until Lyndon, and then who's the Christian in the family? Is Lyndon. We got generational, so she was able to sow something when he was little, and didn't understand it, and it was the only way to calm him down was to pull up the iPad and put this video on for him to watch that we got to see. And so I've always said to Cheryl, her legacy that I see, beside what I'm going to be carrying, the legacy is that our grandson already says he wants to be a pastor. I think, oh, that's because of me. Oh, like he wants to follow in my footsteps. My wife did the sowing. I want to take the reaping, and I want to take the reward, but it's what Cheryl has done that made an influence into his life. And so sometimes when we sow, we want to have it now, but we got to look at it and say, what generation is it going to be coming? When is it going to come? How is it going to come? What is it going to be? I want to say this. I know Glenn very well, and I know that he owns a business. And I know that one of his heart's desires is for his family. Now, that's not just his son and his daughter, but his grandchildren to embrace the company and to work for it so that they can be blessed years after they're gone. That they know that they are leaving a legacy for somebody else in their family. And so when we want to be able to do that, we want to remember, so if I start with saying, hey, my finances, and Cheryl and I have been in this place where we're in this far into debt, we don't know where we look, and then we come to sit down with our pastors, and our pastor says, well, are you tithing? Well, no, we can't tithe because we've got to pay our bills. And I remember Pastor Ruth saying to me, Bruce, if you don't tithe, those bills are going to be here forever. And I remember we tithed for a month, and I went back to Ruth and said, I'm still here. And Ruth said, yeah. I said, I've been tithing, but nothing's changed. And she says, it takes time. Takes time for the work. You need to be showing your faith and discipline in that avenue before God will bless you. I want to tell you, many times I would be saying, what is going on? Cheryl would say, Bruce, we're either going to pay this bill or we're going to tithe. And it wasn't until we got to the place where we're tithing. That's no question. Don't ask about tithing. Ask about the bills. Which one are we going to pay and which one we're not going to pay? Because tithing isn't an option anymore. And it wasn't until that became an absolute in our lives that things started to change slowly. Not until we started to sow in that God started to bless us back. Our finances, did it change? No. We didn't get a windfall. We didn't win a lottery. But what we did win was learning how to handle what God gave us. And when we learned to handle what He gave us, and we learned how to use it, we learned that in different times He starts to bless us. And it takes time for those things to happen. And that means when you sow today and you plant a field, that field will not be ready to go tomorrow. It'll take time, and it'll take a season, and sometimes it takes many seasons before it comes. The sixth law is this: I always reap more than I sow. I always reap more than I sow. No matter what happens, if I'm going to plant a cornfield, it takes one corn for a stalk of corn to come up. And on that stalk, you can have anywhere between 2 and 4 corns on that stalk, maybe more, but from what I read a little bit, it was like 4 is the normal on a stalk of corn. That's from one corn. Now, if you take those corns and you say, okay, I'm going to eat 2, I'm going to take 1 off, and I'm going to take the corn, and I'm going to use that to plant more, well, I probably got 50 to 100 new plants off of that one corn. And so that means whatever I plant in the world, I'm going to get more back. Mark 4:8 says this: some seeds fell on good soil and came up and grew and produced a crop, multiplying it 30, 60, and even 100 times. That tells me whatever I am sowing, wherever I am sowing, that means I'm going to get 30, 60, and even 100 times more. I may not get it today. I may end up getting it down the road, but when I start doing it today, things will happen where it will come to me. It will happen where we will be blessed, and I will get way more than whatever I planted. We live with the 10-10-80 plan, and one of our things is that we try to live in the 80. That's it. If we can afford it in our 80, great. And there's where we try to live in our lives and try to do what we can because we decided that that's what we need to be doing in life. I love the fact that we like to sow into other ministries and other things. And when you sow into other places, you never see that blessings, or you may not see the blessings, but they come when you start sowing into it. The seventh law here is this: I can increase my harvest by planting more seeds. I can increase my harvest by putting more out. If I want more to come back, and the law of is that whatever I sow, I'm going to reap. And so if I want more positive in my life, I need to be more positive. If I want more of that left, I need to have that. And I love the fact that, and we really see when we go to that cancer clinic and we go in, we get treated great every single time. There's not once that we don't get treated. They might be a little slow. They might not be doing it the way that we've learned that they should be doing it. And they may take a little longer than they should, but we get treated great. Why? Because we want to sow into what they're doing. We want to remember that we want to increase what we're getting. We want to increase Cheryl's lifespan. They told us the end of August she wouldn't be here. We wanted to increase that. We wanted to have positiveness in our lives. We wanted to walk in that. Because of the way we were, did she have more? I don't know. I think if we would have been grumbling and complaining and griping, she may not be here. But because we're doing the opposite, we're being blessed by every morning that she wakes up. I get to be blessed because she's still with me. 2 Corinthians 9 says this, remember this, whoever sows sparingly will also reap sparingly. Whoever sows generously will also reap generously. Each should give what he has decided in his heart to give, not reluctantly, not under compulsion, for God loves a cheerful giver. That tells me that I'm going to get what I give out. If I only give out a little, I don't expect lots. If I go out into a field and I got a field of 100 acres and I only plant 1 acre, I'm not going to have 100 acres of field to crop. I'm only going to have that one. I want to have 100 acres. I got to go and sow into 100 acres. And God is into this aspect that I love the fact, and I'm one who is very strong on this, that in this avenue, and this word says, everyone needs to look into their own heart and say, what is God telling you to do? I'm not going to sit here, and I won't sit up here and say, hey, you're not tithing enough and you're not doing this enough. God says we need to decide in our own hearts what is right. And at first it starts out, do I want to sow a little or do I want to sow a lot? Because the choice is mine, and it's my heart that gets that decision. And when I decide that, God loves it when I give cheerfully. Not when, and I want to say this, sometimes when Cheryl and I tithed when we were struggling and do we keep the lights going or do we tithe? And we tithe because that's what it wasn't necessarily cheerful. It wasn't until we came into that idea that this is what God's calling us to do, that we need to be doing this and we need to be doing it cheerfully. We need to be doing it because that's what God wants me to do. And we do. We tithe 10%, period. That's it. We just give it to the church. We don't think about it. We don't live with it. That's what God calls us to do. But he also says, that's what my tithe is. But he says, what's my offering? Where do we want to sow into other areas? And so we do. We look at other places that we love to sow into. And one of the things that we've sown into is into people. We've sown our lives into meeting, talking with people. And when Cheryl got sick, 2 people, 3 actually, I've started to reap back into our lives. Cheryl has Sister Marguerite who calls her every day. Every day, Sister Marguerite calls her and talks to her about what she's walking through. Things I can't walk with her. She's my wife. I can do all best I can, but there's some things that she doesn't need to share with me. And so she needs Sister Marguerite to walk with it. There's some things that I can't share with my wife because the last couple of nights, you can ask her, I start crying in my chair because I stop thinking about today and I start thinking about the future. I start thinking about, I always call her Cheryl Lynn Olson. I'll say, well, Cheryl Lynn Olson, what do you think? And I said that 2 nights ago. And then I started to cry. Because then I started thinking, when she's not there in that chair, I can't call her. And it started to reap. And so when that happens, what I like is that I have someone who calls me twice a week religiously to make sure that where's my thoughts in all of this? See, we poured into people's lives, and now we're starting to harvest those things, and then we can have it. We even have a lady who lives in Thailand who calls us every month to see how we're doing, because she wants to sow into our lives. And so because we were able to do that before, we're reaping now, not knowing that that was going to be happening. Proverbs 11:24 says this, "The world of a generous gets larger and larger, but the world of a stingy gets smaller and smaller." And that's out of the Message. I don't necessarily always agree with the interpretation of the Message, but I like that interpretation. If I want larger and larger in my life, I need to start sowing larger and larger. I want smaller and smaller, and then make my world go smaller. The eighth law now is this. It's time to start planting now. Don't wait for when that's the perfect. Cheryl and I said this to Pastor Ruth, when we are financially okay and out of debt, that's when we can sow. That's when we can tithe. And Ruth would shake her head, "Bruce, you're not understanding." And I would say to her, no, you don't understand. She would say, "No, you don't understand." And when I wait for the best time for things to happen, when things are wonderful, where's my faith? Where am I standing faithfully? I need to learn to start now and just plant. Whatever it is, wherever I'm going, I need to start now. Whatever I want to have financial freedom, I need to start walking in it now. I need to start sowing into it now. I want my bank account to increase. Well, I need to start sowing into the world so my bank account can increase. It wasn't until we started to sow into the world that our bank account changed and how we lived changed. And when we started to do that, things started to happen. Ecclesiastes 11 says this, "Those who wait for perfect weather will never plant seeds, and those who look at every cloud will never reap a harvest." That means if I'm waiting for that perfect weather, it's not going to come. It is not going to come. If you're waiting to be out of debt, you're not going to be ever out of debt. If you're waiting for you to have some savings in your bank account, that's not going to happen. It has to start now. It has to start looking at it. And that's not just with our money, but that's with our time. That's with our energies. That's with our talents. That's with everything God has given you. What are you doing with it? How are you doing with it? What are you walking with? Where are you walking? How are you doing this? And it needs to be looked at and on ways that we could be doing it. Ecclesiastes 11:6 says this, "Do your planting in the morning and in the evening too. You never know whether it will all grow well or whether one plant will do better than the other." It tells me that whatever I'm doing, if I got love, I need to plant it all the time. I want to have grace in my life, I need to be planting it all the time. I want to have money in my life, I need to be investing into others all the time. I want to have more energy in my life, I need to be investing in others' energy. I want to have things of wisdom, I need to be investing into that aspect. Everything I do, I need to be starting now. I need not to be waiting. If we're waiting for Carrie and Diana to be perfect with the guitar and never make a mistake, we'll never have them up here worshiping. Because all of us make mistakes. We all do. And so we're waiting for the perfect thing to happen in our lives. That will not happen. We need to start now, and we need to be starting to do it right away. 2 Corinthians 9:10 says, "For God, who supplied seed for the farmer and the bread to eat, will give you more and more seeds to plant, and will make it grow so you can give away more and more fruit from your harvest." If I need to start doing this, and I need to start doing it more in my life. If I start doing it more now, I'm going to get it down the road. And that's in every aspect of my life. If the farmer wants to be able to give more away, I need to be able to plant more now. I need to start doing this. I need to be doing things now. I need to be investing in people and places and things now. If I want to be able to reap down the road, I need to start now. One of the things is that we need to be doing it for the right reason. And if I'm only doing it because I know I'm going to get back, we may be doing it for the wrong reasons. I'm only going to give to this ministry because I know that ministry is going to give back. I can't be doing it. I need to be doing it because I just want to act with faith and I just want to do it. 1 Corinthians 9:11 says, reaping a material harvest is appropriate if we have spiritual seeds among us. How are we doing spiritually? And how are we walking spiritually? And where are we walking spiritually is what God's calling us to do. He's going to allow us to reap a great harvest, but if we're not spiritually fit, He's going to keep that harvest away from us. He is not going to allow us to walk into something that we can't do if we're not fit. And the last one is this. To reap the harvest, I must be patient and not give up. I can't give up just because I've started it 2 weeks ago and I don't see any success today. How come it's not happening? How come I'm not in this place of financial success? Businesses don't start up one day with all that they have and invest in it and hope in 2 weeks later, okay, I'm a financial success. It doesn't happen. It takes time. It takes time to sow into things. It takes time to do things. Mark 4 says this. This is what the kingdom of God is like. A man scatters seed on the ground day and night, whether he is sleeping or he gets up, the seeds sprout and grow, though he doesn't know how. All by itself, the soil produces grain. First the staff, then the head, then the full kernels ahead. See, what happens is that a farmer will go out and scatter the seed. And first of all, I want to say this. This line, I want to say, it blew my mind. I've stopped. Every time I read it, I stop. This is what the kingdom of God is like. If you remember 2 weeks ago, that was Jesus' line as well. This is what the kingdom of God is like. A man going on a journey. Because I remember I asked Glenn to stand up because we was going away on a journey. I wanted to tease him a little more. But now it says the kingdom of God is like a man scattering seeds on the ground. So again, Jesus is using, you got to go back 2,000 years ago. We didn't have tractors, automated systems. We had man stood behind a plow and an ox or a horse or a donkey. He had a pouch in front of him. He had his seed in there, and he was walking along, and as he was walking, he was scattering the seeds. That's called sowing and weeping. That is what they're doing. They're scattering it. And when Jesus says, and the farmer does it day and night. So that means the farmer's out there all day. He's not, okay, I'm going to wait for the perfect, you know what? It's a little cloudy and a little windy today. I better not go out today. Well, the next day it's going to be even windier. And the next day it's going to be raining. Our season of rain has come upon us. And all of that's going to wait unless I get out there and start doing it now. Nothing's going to happen. I need to start now, and I need to start doing it now. I love the fact that now it says the kingdom of God is like a man scattering seeds on the ground. The kingdom of God, again, is like this. And so we need to be walking into this aspect. And we need to remembering that when I'm going and scattering my seeds, I just need to sit and sleep and not worry about what's coming back, because eventually when it comes back, it'll come back a way I don't know. Because I may invest in one thing, but I may get something completely different. And that first investment may never work. But something else that I do will come back. And I need to stop and not give up. I need to remember that no matter what, I need to forge ahead. I need to be walking in whatever God's called me to do. And I will say this, Cheryl and I have been even talking, and I have said to her, what do I do when you're not here? Where do I go, and how do I live? And she is consistently wants to smack me in the back of the head every time I ask that question, because she says, you continue doing what you're doing. You don't stop. God's not called you to give up. He's called you to forge ahead. And that's in all of our lives. Whatever we have done, wherever we are being, He calls us to do that. So worship team, come on up. I'm going to move down here. So this law of sowing and weeping, it says everything starts with a seed. And it tells us that nothing happens without that seed in our lives. And it says nothing happens until we plant that seed into the ground. And until we plant that seed in the ground, nothing will ever happen in our lives until we start doing it. And it tells me whatever I sow is what I'm going to reap. That means if I'm planting tomato plants, I'm going to get tomato plants. But if I'm sowing into someone else's life, I'm going to get life. If I'm sowing into something, I'm going to beget what I've sown into. Got to remember that I'm not the only sower in this world. Others are going to be sowing into my life as well. I need to remember that even generational sowings have happened. I always reap in a different season. That means when I start sowing today, I'm not going to get today. I always reap more than I sow. That means if I'm going to sow into someone's life, I'm going to get way more back in from it. That means that one kernel of corn or one apple tree, within 10 years, I can have an orchard of apple trees by taking the seeds from the first apple tree and start planting new apple trees. I always get more than I ever plant. And I can increase what I'm harvesting at any time. I can increase what I'm doing anytime I want. Anytime I want to do it, I can increase it. One of my pastor friends that I knew from my old church, Ben Woodman, who actually spoke here one time, he had said that his goal in life was to take 50% of everything him and his wife make and give it away. 50%, that's his goal in his life. And he said him and Melissa were 28% at that point in time. And their goal was to get to 50% of everything he gave away. His goal was that he wanted to give away more than he got. He wanted to do it. Time to start planting is now. That we need to start planting in our lives. We need to do it now. And we need to be patient and not give up. The moment we give up, in recovery, and Celebrate Recovery, they will say this to somebody new. Don't give up before the miracle happens in your life. Most people who end up going back into drug, alcohol, or financial things, or other things in their life, they're giving up just before that miracle is going to happen in their lives. And don't give up just before that miracle of what God wants to do in your life is going to happen. Worship team.